The first time I felt something in 3 years, I was standing in a hospital corridor at 2 a.m., and the feeling nearly brought me to my knees. Not pain. Not joy. Just feeling. Like someone had flipped a switch I'd forgotten existed, and suddenly the world came rushing back in terrifying, beautiful waves. And it was because of her. A complete stranger whose name I didn't even know yet, whose face I'd seen for exactly 47 seconds, whose voice had cracked when she'd whispered something to the nurse that I couldn't quite hear. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it really started, to the moment everything I thought I knew about being alive turned out to be a carefully constructed lie. 3 years ago, I stopped feeling anything at all. Someone once told me these stories would never matter, that no one would listen. If you're here right now, help me prove them wrong. Subscribe, because stories like this deserve a voice. It wasn't a gradual thing. Not like depression, which I'd watched consume my college roommate slowly, day by day. This was instant. Clinical. Complete. One moment I was Elian Thorne, 26 years old, engaged to the love of my life, planning a future that sparkled with possibility. The next moment, I was something else entirely. Something hollow. The doctors called it emotional detachment disorder following acute psychological trauma. I called it living in a world made of cardboard and cotton, where nothing touched me, nothing moved me, nothing mattered. They said it was my brain's way of protecting me from what had happened that night. The night Sophia died. We were supposed to get married in 3 months. She had the dress already, vintage lace, hanging in her closet, a ghost of a future that would never arrive. We'd been arguing about something stupid, I can't even remember what. Something about the seating chart, or the flowers, or whether her cousin should be invited despite the drama he'd caused at her sister's wedding. She'd stormed out, taking her car even though she'd had 2 glasses of wine. I'd let her go. I'd been angry too, wrapped up in being right about something that didn't matter at all. And then, 20 minutes later, my phone rang. I remember standing in our apartment, holding that phone, listening to a police officer tell me that Sophia was gone. I remember thinking, very clearly, that this couldn't be real. That any moment now, she'd walk through the door, and we'd laugh about this terrible dream I'd had. I remember sitting down on the couch, very carefully, as if sudden movement might shatter something essential. And then, nothing. Just nothing. For 3 years, I went through the motions. I was a sound engineer for a production company, and apparently my hands remembered how to do the job even when my heart had checked out. I ate when my body demanded it. I slept when exhaustion forced me to. I attended therapy sessions where I nodded at appropriate intervals while my therapist, Dr. Reeves, asked questions that seemed to come from a different dimension. How does that make you feel, Elian? It didn't make me feel anything. Nothing made me feel anything. My parents had stopped calling as much. Not because they didn't care, I could see the worry in their eyes when they visited, the way my mother would touch my face like she was checking to see if I was still real, but because talking to me had become like talking to a recording. I gave the right responses, smiled at the right moments, but there was nobody home behind my eyes. I'd become a master at pretending. At work, I was the quiet guy who did exceptional work and never caused problems. At the grocery store, I was the polite customer who thanked the cashier and bagged my own groceries. To the few friends who still tried, I was doing better and taking it day by day and really appreciating their support. But alone, in the apartment I'd shared with Sophia, because I couldn't bring myself to leave it, even though every corner held memories I couldn't feel, I was nothing. An outline of a person. A sketch waiting for someone to fill in the colors. Until that night. That impossible night that changed everything. I'd been working late at the studio, mixing audio for a documentary about urban wildlife. The project didn't interest me, nothing did, but the director was a friend of a friend, and I'd said yes because saying yes was easier than explaining why I wanted to say no. Around midnight, I'd gotten a call from my neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, a 78-year-old retired teacher who'd adopted me as a sort of surrogate grandson after Sophia died. "Elian, dear, I'm so sorry to bother you," her voice had trembled over the line, "but I've fallen in my bathroom and I can't get up. I don't want to call an ambulance, you know how expensive those are, but I think I might have broken something." I'd driven to her apartment, 3 floors below mine in our building, and found her exactly as she'd described, crumpled beside her bathtub, her left ankle already swelling to twice its normal size. I'd called the ambulance despite her protests, had ridden with her to County General because she had no family in the city, had sat in the waiting room while they took x-rays and ran tests. And that's where I saw her. She'd rushed through the emergency room entrance like a storm given human form, dark hair wild around her face, eyes wide with panic, a burgundy coat half falling off her shoulders. She'd run straight to the reception desk, words tumbling out too fast for me to catch them all, but I heard enough. Someone she loved was hurt. Critical condition. She needed to see them. Now. Please, God, now. The nurse had been kind but firm. "I'm sorry, but you'll need to wait until the doctor." "You don't understand," the woman had interrupted, and her voice had cracked right down the middle, splintering into something raw and desperate. "I can't lose him. I already lost everyone else. He's all I have left." And that's when it happened. 3 years of nothing. 3 years of existing in a world without color, without texture, without weight. And then, like someone had detonated a bomb in my chest, I felt everything. Terror for this stranger and whoever she was about to lose. Grief for the pain in her voice. Memory, sharp and vicious, of standing in a different hospital, receiving different news, becoming a different person. And underneath it all, something I couldn't name. Something that felt like recognition, though we'd never met. I'd stood up without deciding to. Taken 3 steps toward her without knowing why. She'd turned, maybe she'd felt something too, or maybe she'd just sensed movement in her peripheral vision, and our eyes met. For exactly 47 seconds, the emergency room fell away. Her eyes were hazel, I would realize later. But in that moment, they were just everything. Every question I'd forgotten how to ask. Every answer I'd stopped believing in. Every possibility I'd buried with Sophia. Then a doctor appeared, calling her name, Freya Valdis. And she'd torn her gaze away from mine, running after him through double doors that swung shut behind her with a finality that felt like a door closing on something I'd barely glimpsed. I'd stood there, heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to remember its rhythm, hands shaking, breath coming too fast and too shallow. Feeling everything. Feeling too much. And I'd thought, what the hell just happened to me? Mrs. Kowalski's fracture turned out to be minor. They'd put her in a boot, given her crutches, and released her by 3 a.m. I'd driven her home, helped her get settled, promised to check on her in the morning. And then I'd returned to my apartment and stood in the shower for 40 minutes, letting scalding water pour over me while I tried to process the impossible. I could feel again. Not completely. Not perfectly. It was like someone had turned the dial from 0 to 3 on a scale that went to 10. But after 3 years of absolute nothing, 3 felt like everything. And it was because of her. Freya Valdis. A name I now knew. A face I couldn't forget. A stranger who'd somehow, impossibly, brought me back to life. I should have let it go. Should have marked it down as a strange coincidence, a fluke of neurology, a random firing of dormant synapses. I should have returned to my half-life and been grateful for even this small crack in the wall. But I didn't. Because 3 days later, I saw her again. And that's when everything started to unravel. I wasn't looking for her. I need you to understand that. I wasn't some obsessed stranger stalking a woman through the city, building fantasies around a 47-second moment of eye contact. I had simply been walking to work, taking the same route I'd taken for 3 years, moving through the world like a ghost who'd learned to navigate by memory rather than sight. And there she was, sitting alone at an outdoor table at Vera's coffee house on the corner of Washington and Fifth. She looked different in daylight. Smaller, somehow. More real. The wild panic from the hospital had been replaced by a kind of careful stillness, like she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. She wore a cream-colored sweater, and her dark hair was pulled back in a loose knot that was slowly coming undone. She was staring at a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold, her hands wrapped around it like she'd forgotten how to let go. I should have kept walking. Every rational part of my brain, what was left of it after 3 years of emotional shutdown, screamed at me to keep moving, to not disturb this woman who was clearly dealing with her own crisis, to not pin my sudden reawakening on a complete stranger who owed me nothing. But I could feel again. For the first time in 3 years, I could feel, and that feeling seemed to intensify the closer I got to her, like she was the sun and I was a planet pulled into orbit despite every law of physics that should have kept me drifting through cold space. I sat down at the empty chair across from her before I could talk myself out of it. She looked up, startled. Then her eyes widened with recognition. You. Me, I agreed, my voice rusty from disuse in any meaningful conversation. From the hospital. The other night. You were in the waiting room. Her voice was softer than I remembered. Tired. But there was something in it, a warmth, maybe, or just the memory of warmth, that made my chest ache in ways I'd forgotten were possible. My neighbor broke her ankle. I drove her there. I paused. How's whoever you were there for? A shadow crossed her face, and I immediately regretted asking. But then she said, my brother. Rafe. He was in a car accident. They thought. She stopped, swallowed hard. But he's going to be okay. Broken ribs, concussion, but he'll recover. I'm glad. And I meant it. I could feel that I meant it, which was a revelation in itself. We sat in silence for a moment. She studied me with an intensity that should have made me uncomfortable but somehow didn't. Finally, she said, you looked at me that night like you knew me. But we've never met before, have we? No. I hesitated. How did you explain the inexplicable? But when I saw you, when I heard your voice, something happened. Something I can't really explain. She leaned back in her chair, and I saw a flash of something in her eyes, understanding, maybe, or recognition of her own. I felt it too, she said quietly. Like the air changed. Like everything stopped. How long has it been? I asked, the question coming from somewhere deep and instinctive, since you felt anything real? Her hands tightened around the coffee cup. How did you? She stopped. Looked away. 2 years. Since my parents died. House fire. Rafe and I got out. They didn't. Her voice was flat, factual, like she was reading from a police report. After that, it was like someone turned off all the lights. I've been going through the motions, pretending to be alive, but I haven't actually felt alive in. Until the hospital, I finished for her. Until the hospital, she confirmed. She met my eyes again. Until I looked at you. The coffee shop bustled around us, the hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of morning customers, the scrape of chairs against tile, but we existed in a bubble outside of it all, two people who'd forgotten how to be human suddenly remembering in each other's presence. This is crazy, Freya said, but she didn't move. Didn't leave. We don't know each other. This doesn't make any sense. Nothing about the last 3 years of my life has made sense, I told her. At least this is a good kind of nonsense. She almost smiled. Almost. 3 years? My fiancé died. Car accident. I was supposed to save her, or stop her, or do something differently, but I didn't. And after that, I just stopped. Stopped feeling. Stopped caring. Stopped being anything except a body going through routines. I'm sorry. And the way she said it, not performative, not the automatic condolence people offered when they didn't know what else to say, but genuine and raw, made me believe she understood in a way most people couldn't. I'm sorry about your parents, I said. And I'm sorry you've been going through this alone. Rafe's been there, she said quickly. He tries. But he grieves differently. He got angry, threw himself into work, started taking risks. I went numb. We've been living in the same apartment but might as well be on different planets. I knew exactly what she meant. Freya's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, and something shifted in her expression, a tightening around her eyes, a tension in her shoulders. I have to go, she said, but she didn't stand up immediately. There's something I need to take care of. Can I see you again? The words came out before I could stop them, desperate and raw in a way that should have embarrassed me. She stood, gathering her coat, her bag. For a terrible moment, I thought she would say no. That this bizarre connection would end here, and I would return to my cardboard existence with only the memory of what feeling could be like. But then she pulled out her phone, opened a new contact. Give me your number. I did. She saved it, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. Elian Thorne, she read from where I'd typed my name. Like the bird? Wrong spelling. But close enough. Freya Valdis. Like the Norse goddess. Of love and war, I said, surprising myself with the knowledge. Your parents had high expectations. This time, she did smile. Small, sad, but real. They had a lot of things. Expectations. Dreams. Traditions. None of it matters now. She left before I could ask what she meant. I watched her walk away, and I felt it, the distance growing between us like a physical thing, the world starting to gray out at the edges again. Not completely. Not back to the absolute zero I'd existed in before. But enough to terrify me. Whatever this was, whatever impossible thing was happening between us, I needed it. Needed her. And that realization was both thrilling and horrifying in equal measure. She texted me that night. Just 2 words, tomorrow? Noon? I responded immediately, where? Riverside Park. By the old carousel. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. I lay in bed, feeling the weight of the blankets, the texture of the sheets, the beating of my heart. All these sensations I'd taken for granted before Sophia died, then forgotten existed, now rushing back like a tide. At 11 the next morning, I was already at the park, sitting on a bench near the carousel that hadn't operated in years, watching families walk by, dogs chasing tennis balls, life happening all around me like I'd just learned to see color again. Freya arrived exactly at noon, and the world clicked into higher resolution. We walked, talked, told each other things we probably shouldn't have told strangers, about the therapy that didn't work, the medications that numbed without healing, the well-meaning friends who'd eventually stopped trying. About the guilt of surviving when others didn't. About the weight of waking up every morning and having to remember, all over again, that the people we'd loved were gone. "Do you think it's wrong?" she asked as we sat on the edge of a fountain that had been drained for winter. "To feel something because of another person when we couldn't feel anything for ourselves?" I thought about it. "I think maybe we needed permission," I said finally. "Or maybe just proof that feeling was still possible. That we weren't broken forever. Are we using each other?" Her voice was small. "Probably." I turned to look at her. "Does that make it wrong?" She met my eyes, and I saw my own confusion reflected back at me. "I don't know. I don't know anything anymore except that when I'm near you, I remember what it felt like to be alive. And I'm terrified that if I walk away, I'll lose that again." "Then don't walk away." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" She looked away. "Because I'm engaged, Elian. I've been engaged for 6 months. The wedding is in 8 weeks. And I don't feel anything when I'm with him." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so wrapped up in my own resurrection, my own impossible awakening, that I hadn't considered she might have an entire life I was crashing into. "Oh. His name is Camden Cross. We've known each other since college. After my parents died, he was there. Steady. Reliable. Safe. He proposed a year after they passed, and I said yes because..." She trailed off, shrugged helplessly. "Because it seemed like what I was supposed to do. Because he loved me, even if I couldn't love him back. Because I thought maybe that was enough." "Is it?" I asked quietly. "I don't know." She turned back to me, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. 3 days ago, I would have said yes. That love wasn't something I could feel anymore, so what did it matter who I married? Camden is kind. He'll be a good husband. We'll have a good life. But now? But now I've felt something. With you. This stranger I've known for 72 hours. And it's terrifying because I don't know if it's real or if I'm just desperate for any feeling at all. I don't know if I'm about to ruin my entire life for something that might disappear tomorrow. I wanted to promise her it wouldn't disappear. That this connection was real, permanent, meaningful. But I couldn't. I was just as lost as she was, just as terrified, just as confused about whether we were healing each other or using each other as emotional life support. "What do you want to do?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "I want to be selfish. Just for a little while. I want to keep seeing you, keep feeling this, before I have to make any decisions about Camden or the wedding or the rest of my life." Is that horrible? No. I reached out, almost touched her hand, stopped myself at the last second. I think it's the most honest thing either of us has said in years. So we became each other's secret. A strange, fragile thing built on shared brokenness and the desperate need to feel alive. We met in parks, in coffee shops on the edges of the city, in quiet corners where no one knew us. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. She told me about her job, she was a botanical illustrator, creating intricate drawings of plants for scientific journals. I told her about the sounds I captured, the way I could hear the world in layers most people missed. We didn't touch. Not beyond the accidental brush of hands when we both reached for the same cup, the momentary contact when we walked too close on a crowded sidewalk. Because we both knew, though neither of us said it, that touching would change everything. That the careful balance we'd created would shatter, and we'd have to make choices neither of us was ready for. But 2 weeks into our strange arrangement, everything changed. I got a call at 2 a.m. Freya's number. When I answered, all I heard was crying. Deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to tear her apart from the inside. Freya? What's wrong? What happened? Can you? She couldn't seem to catch her breath. Can you come get me? Please? She rattled off an address in the warehouse district. I can't go home. I can't face him. Please, Elian. I was already pulling on clothes, grabbing my keys. I'm coming. Stay there. I'm coming right now. I found her sitting on the curb outside an old converted warehouse, hugging her knees to her chest, shaking despite the coat wrapped around her. I pulled up, got out of the car, and for the first time, I touched her intentionally. Put my arms around her and held on while she shattered against my chest. He knows, she finally managed to say. Camden knows. About you. About us meeting. He hired someone to follow me. He has pictures. He thinks we're having an affair. But we're not, I said automatically. She pulled back, looked up at me with devastated eyes. Aren't we? Maybe not physically, but Elian, I'm more intimate with you than I've ever been with him. I tell you things I've never told anyone. When I'm with you, I'm more myself than I've been in 2 years. If that's not a betrayal, what is it? I didn't have an answer. She laughed, bitter and broken. He gave me an ultimatum. Stop seeing you immediately, go to couples counseling, move up the wedding to next month. Or the engagement is off. My heart stopped. What did you say? I didn't say anything. I just left. Because I realized standing there, listening to him try to negotiate for my love like it was a business deal, that I couldn't do it. I can't marry him. Not when I know what this feels like. She gestured between us. Even if this is temporary. Even if you and I crash and burn tomorrow. I can't go back to pretending I'm alive when I'm really just a very convincing ghost. The relief that flooded through me was immediately chased by guilt. Someone's life was falling apart, and I was glad. What did that make me? Come home with me, I said. Tonight. Just tonight. We'll figure out tomorrow when tomorrow comes. She nodded, let me help her into the car. We drove through empty streets, the city sleeping around us while our small world turned itself inside out. In my apartment, Sophia's apartment, technically, still decorated with her taste, her choices, her ghost, Freya stood in the middle of the living room looking lost. I should call Rafe, she said. He'll be worried. In the morning, I told her. Tonight, just breathe. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and something shifted in the air between us. That careful distance we'd maintained, the unspoken agreement not to touch beyond what was absolutely necessary, suddenly felt like the only barrier between us and something vast and unknowable. Elian, she whispered. I'm scared. Of what? Of this. Of you. Of how much I feel when I shouldn't feel anything at all. I crossed the distance between us. Slow. giving her time to stop me, to step back, to maintain the careful boundaries we'd built. But she didn't move. Just stood there, watching me approach like I was something miraculous and terrifying in equal measure. When I was close enough that I could see the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, close enough that I could count her heartbeat in the pulse at her throat, I stopped. "Tell me to leave you alone," I said. "Tell me this is crazy and we need to stop before someone gets hurt." "Someone's already hurt," she said. "Multiple someones. The question is whether we're brave enough to be honest about what we want despite the wreckage." "What do you want, Freya?" She reached up, touched my face with shaking fingers. The contact sent electricity through my entire body, 3 years of numbness shattering like glass. "I want to feel," she breathed. "I want to remember what it's like to be touched by someone who sees me. Really sees me. Not the version I pretend to be, but the broken, grieving, barely holding it together person underneath." I closed the final distance between us. The kiss was nothing like kissing Sophia had been. That had been comfortable, familiar, built on years of knowing each other. This was raw and desperate and new. This was two drowning people finding air. This was permission to be broken and alive at the same time. We pulled apart, breathing hard, and I saw my own wonder reflected in her eyes. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Before this goes any further. Because if we do this, really do this, you need to know the truth about me." A chill went through me. "What truth?" She stepped back, wrapped her arms around herself. "The night my parents died. The fire. It wasn't an accident, Elian. It was arson. Someone burned down our house deliberately. And they never found who did it." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "What?" "The investigation is still open. The police think it might have been targeted. My father was a prosecutor. He put away a lot of dangerous people. Any one of them could have wanted revenge. Or it could have been random. No one knows. But someone killed my parents, and they're still out there. Freya. There's more." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Camden's father is a detective. He's been investigating the case. That's actually how Camden and I got close again after years of barely talking. He was there, helping his father, being supportive. And about a month ago, he told me they might have a lead. Someone his father wants to bring in for questioning. That's good, right? That they might finally find who did it?" She met my eyes, and I saw something in them that made my blood run cold. "The person they want to question?" "It's a sound engineer who was working at the production studio across from my parents' house the night of the fire. Someone who would have had access to the building. Someone who left town for a few months right after it happened. Someone who's been behaving strangely ever since." The world stopped. "Elian," she whispered. "Where were you on the night of October 14th, 2 years ago?" I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. October 14th. The date was seared into my brain because it was exactly 3 weeks after Sophia died. I'd been a wreck, barely functional. And yes, I'd been working at a production studio. And yes, I'd left town shortly after, driven to my parents' house upstate where I'd stayed for 2 months, trying to remember how to be human. "No," I said. "No. Freya, I didn't, I would never." "I know," she said quickly. "I know you didn't. Because I've spent the last 2 weeks asking myself if I could feel this way about someone capable of burning down a house with people inside, and the answer is no. You didn't do it. Then why are you telling me this?" Because Camden knows about you. He has your name, your address, your work history. And when he ran a background check and saw you were working across from my parents' house that night, he connected dots that shouldn't be connected. He's going to tell his father. He's probably already told him. And when the police come asking questions, and they will, you need to be prepared. I sat down hard on the couch, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. This is insane. I barely remember that night. I was barely functional. I certainly didn't burn down anyone's house. I believe you. She knelt in front of me, took my hands in hers. But someone did. And if Camden's father is looking at you, we need to figure out who actually did it before you become the convenient scapegoat. We? You think I'm going to let you face this alone? She squeezed my hands. You brought me back to life, Elian. The least I can do is keep you out of prison for a crime you didn't commit. And that's how we went from being each other's emotional life support to being partners in uncovering a truth that someone had killed to keep buried. Somewhere in the city, a real murderer was walking free. And we had exactly 8 weeks before Freya's wedding to find them. The clock was ticking. The thing about coming back to life after years of numbness is that you don't get to choose which emotions return first. I'd hoped for something manageable, maybe mild contentment, or the gentle pleasure of a good meal. Instead, I got terror in its purest form, sharp and bright and absolutely overwhelming. I was potentially a murder suspect. In the death of what was Freya to me? Not my girlfriend. We'd known each other for 2 weeks. Shared one kiss. But she felt more real to me than anyone had in 3 years, and now I was tangled up in the worst moment of her life in ways neither of us could have imagined. Walk me through that night, Freya said. We were still in my apartment, now sitting across from each other at the kitchen table with coffee neither of us was drinking. Dawn was starting to break outside, painting everything in shades of gray and pink. October 14th, 2 years ago. Everything you remember. I closed my eyes, tried to pull the memory forward. That entire period of my life was a blur, weeks and months that had bled together into one continuous stretch of just trying to survive from one moment to the next. I was working at Meridian Studios, I said slowly. They'd hired me to do post-production work on a series of commercial spots. I was there late that night because being home was harder. The apartment still smelled like Sophia's perfume. Her things were everywhere. At least at the studio, I could pretend I was a person with a purpose. What time did you leave? I don't know. Late. Maybe 1 or 2 in the morning? I remember the streets being empty. Did you see anything unusual? Hear anything? People nearby, cars that didn't belong? I shook my head. I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't paying attention to anything back then. A thought struck me. But the studio would have security footage. And key card logs. They'd show exactly when I entered and left. Freya's eyes lit up. That's something. If we can prove you were inside the building when the fire started. When did it start? I interrupted. Exactly? She pulled out her phone, searched through what must have been files she'd looked at 1,000 times. The first 911 call came in at 1:47 a.m. The fire department estimated it had been burning for maybe 15 to 20 minutes before that, based on the spread and intensity. So sometime between 1:20 and 1:30. Approximately. I stood up, started pacing. It was easier to think when I was moving, and my body suddenly remembered how to do things beyond just sitting still and enduring. I can get those records. My boss from back then, Joseph Castellanos, he's still there. He liked me. Or at least he felt sorry for me. If I explain. No. Freya's voice was sharp. You can't tell anyone what we're doing. If Camden's father is building a case against you, anything you do that looks like you're trying to establish an alibi will seem suspicious. We need to be subtle. She was right. Of course she was right. But the walls were closing in, and subtle felt like a luxury we couldn't afford. Okay, I said. Then how do we do this? Freya stood, started pacing in the opposite direction, our paths crossing in the middle of the small kitchen like some kind of dance. We start with what we know. Someone burned down my family's house. The police think it was targeted. My father's work as a prosecutor made him enemies. But they've never found any evidence pointing to a specific person. What cases was he working on at the time? That's the problem. Dozens. He was always working. Organized crime, white-collar fraud, violent offenders. The police tried to narrow it down, but there were too many possibilities. Too many people who might have wanted him dead. I stopped pacing. Wait. You said Camden's father is a detective. Wouldn't he have access to all those case files? To the investigation notes? Freya nodded slowly. He does. Camden used to tell me things, before everything got complicated. He wanted to help me find closure. Give me answers. So he knows the details. The suspects they looked at. The evidence they gathered. Yes. She met my eyes. And now he thinks you're involved. The coffee maker burbled in the corner, the sound absurdly normal against the background of our conversation. I poured us both fresh cups just to have something to do with my hands. Here's what I don't understand, I said. Even if I was working across the street, even if I left town afterward, which I did, but for completely unrelated reasons, that's not enough to make me a serious suspect. There must be something else. Something that actually connects me to the fire. Freya wrapped her hands around the fresh coffee cup. Camden mentioned something once. About finding accelerant traces that matched a specific brand of equipment cleaner. The kind used in recording studios. My stomach dropped. Lots of studios use that. Lots of people. But you were there. That night. In a studio that would have had that exact type of cleaner. So was everyone else who worked there. Plus anyone who could have accessed the building. Freya, this is circumstantial at best. I know that. You know that. But if Camden's father is under pressure to close this case, to give my family justice, to make someone pay, sometimes people see what they want to see. I thought about my own experience with the police after Sophia died. The gentle but persistent questions about whether we'd been fighting, whether I'd been drinking, whether I'd tried to stop her from driving. They'd been kind. Ultimately, it was clearly an accident, and I was clearly destroyed by it. But I remembered the way they'd looked at me in those first few hours, before they'd ruled me out as a suspect. Like I was something to be solved rather than someone to be helped. We need to find out who really did it, I said. That's the only way this ends well. Agreed. But how? The police have been investigating for 2 years with all their resources and haven't found anything conclusive. I sat back down at the table. Because they're looking at it wrong. They're looking for someone with a motive to hurt your father professionally. But what if it wasn't about your father at all? Freya frowned. What do you mean? You said Rafe got out too. You both survived. Your parents didn't. What if the target wasn't your father specifically, but your family more generally? Or what if, I stopped, a horrible thought occurring to me. What if you were the target? Or Rafe? She'd gone very pale. That doesn't make sense. I was a botanical illustrator. Rafe was a graduate student studying environmental engineering. We weren't important enough to target. People don't have to be important to be targets. Sometimes it's personal. An ex who won't let go. Someone who feels slighted or rejected or threatened. The police looked into that. I didn't have any ex-boyfriends with grudges. Rafe didn't have any enemies that anyone could find. That anyone could find, I repeated. But what about enemies you didn't know about? What about someone who felt like they had a connection to you that you didn't reciprocate? Or someone Rafe encountered in his work who felt threatened by something he discovered? Freya was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was small. There was someone. A guy I met at a gallery opening about 3 months before the fire. His name was Tobias something. We talked about art and plants, and he seemed nice. He asked me out, and I said no politely, I thought. But he kept showing up places. The coffee shop I went to. The library where I did research. Always with a reason, always friendly, but it felt wrong. Yes. I mentioned it to my father. He said if it continued, we'd file a restraining order. But then it just stopped. A week before the fire, I realized I hadn't seen him in over a month. I figured he'd moved on. Or he was planning something. I leaned forward. Freya, do you remember his last name? Anything else about him? She closed her eyes, thinking. Tobias. Revere? Reeves? Something like that. He said he was a freelance photographer. He had this old film camera he carried everywhere, said he was working on a project about urban nature. How plants reclaim abandoned spaces. My blood ran cold. Did you tell the police about him? I did, after the fire. They said they'd look into it, but I never heard anything more. I assumed they'd cleared him. Or they couldn't find him. I was already pulling out my laptop. If he was using a fake name, or if he left the city. We spent the next 2 hours searching. Tobias Revere didn't exist, at least not in any official capacity in our city. No social media, no professional listings, no address. But Freya remembered the gallery where they'd met, the Ashworth Gallery in the Arts District. She even remembered the opening. It was for an exhibition by a sculptor named Daria Kim. I called the gallery as soon as they opened at 10. The woman who answered, her name was Simone, and she had the tired voice of someone who'd worked in customer service too long, said she remembered the Kim exhibition. Do you keep records of attendees? I asked. A guest book, maybe? We do, but that was 2 years ago. I'd have to check the archives. It's important. Please. I'll hold. 10 minutes of elevator music later, Simone came back on the line. Okay, I found it. What name are you looking for? Tobias Revere. Or just Tobias with any last name. Papers rustled. No Tobias anything. Sorry. My heart sank. But then Freya grabbed my arm, eyes wide. The photographer, she whispered. Ask about the photographer they hired for the event. Did you hire a photographer for that opening? I asked Simone. Let me check the invoice files. More waiting. Then, yes. A freelancer named Lysander Beck. He did a lot of gallery events back then. Lysander Beck. Not Tobias Revere. But photographers sometimes used professional names, or collected them as cover stories. I got Beck's contact information, an email and a phone number. The phone went straight to a disconnected message. The email bounced back as undeliverable. Dead end, Freya said, deflating. But I was already searching Lysander Beck in every database I could access. And there, buried in a 3-year-old city permit application, I found something. Lysander Beck had filed for permission to photograph in various public parks for a project titled Urban Wilderness, Nature's Revenge. The same project Tobias had mentioned to Freya. It's the same person, I said. Tobias Revere was Lysander Beck. Or they're both fake names for someone else entirely. But who? And how do we find him? I stared at the permit application. It listed a business address, a P.O. box at a mailing center that had since closed down. Another dead end. But it also required a secondary contact in case the primary couldn't be reached. And that contact was listed as Westbrook Properties, with a phone number that, when I called it, was answered by a cheerful receptionist. Westbrook Properties, this is Janelle, how can I help you? I improvised quickly. Hi, I'm trying to reach someone who used to rent from you. Lysander Beck? He was a photographer. Let me check our records. Typing sounds. Oh, yes. Mr. Beck rented a studio apartment from us 3 years ago. But he broke his lease about 2 years ago. Left without notice, actually. Still owes us back rent. 2 years ago. Right around the time of the fire. Do you have a forwarding address? I'm sorry, we don't. But. She hesitated. Look, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but he left a lot of stuff behind. Photography equipment, personal items. We boxed it all up and put it in storage in case he ever came back for it. He never did. My heart raced. Is there any way I could look at those items? I glanced at Freya. I'm his cousin. We lost touch, and the family's been worried about him. Another hesitation. Then, I suppose that would be okay. The storage unit is in the basement. When can you come by? We were there within the hour. The storage unit was exactly what you'd expect, a small, windowless room in a building basement, filled with boxes that smelled like dust and abandonment. Janelle led us in, gestured to 3 large cardboard boxes stacked against one wall. That's everything, she said. Take your time. Just lock up when you're done. The first box contained photography equipment, lenses, a tripod, film canisters. The second had clothes and books. But the third box, hidden at the bottom beneath a layer of ordinary personal effects, contained something that made us both freeze. Notebooks. Dozens of them. And when Freya opened the first one with shaking hands, we found page after page of sketches, photographs, and handwritten notes. All about her. Pictures of her entering and leaving her apartment. Sketches of her sitting in coffee shops. Detailed notes about her schedule, her habits, her routines. And interspersed throughout, increasingly disturbed writing about how she was meant to be his, how they were destined to be together, how her family was keeping them apart. Oh God, Freya whispered, flipping through page after page. Oh God, he was stalking me for months. How did I not see this? The last notebook was different. The handwriting was more erratic, the entries darker. And on the final page, dated October 13th, one day before the fire, was a single sentence that made my blood run ice cold. If I can't have her, no one will. If they won't let us be together, they don't deserve to keep her. He did it, Freya breathed. Lysander Beck, Tobias Revere, whoever he really is, he burned down my house. He killed my parents. But when we showed everything to the police the next day, prepared to finally give Freya the justice she deserved and clear my name in the process, we walked into a nightmare. Because waiting at the police station, sitting calmly in Detective Cross's office, was someone who looked very familiar from the photographs in those notebooks. The man introduced himself as Lysander Beck. He had an alibi for the night of the fire. He'd been in another state, at a photography conference, with dozens of witnesses. He claimed the notebooks had been stolen from his apartment 2 weeks before the fire. He'd filed a police report about the break-in, which Detective Cross confirmed. And then Beck looked directly at me and said, "I think you took them. I think you've been trying to frame me for a crime you committed." The room spun. This couldn't be happening. "That's insane," I said. "I've never met you before in my life." "Really?" Beck pulled out his phone, showed us a photograph. This was taken outside Meridian Studios on October 12th. 2 days before the fire. "That's you, isn't it?" It was. I was standing outside the studio, talking to someone I didn't recognize. The timestamp on the photo was clearly visible, 11:47 p.m. "Who is that I'm talking to?" I demanded. Beck smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I don't know. But you look pretty friendly. Almost like you knew each other. Almost like you were planning something." I thought my brain might explode. This was a setup. It had to be. But it was so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that I couldn't see the seams. Detective Cross, Camden's father, looked at me with something like pity. "Mr. Thorne, I think you should get a lawyer." That's when I realized I wasn't just a suspect anymore. I was the primary suspect. And everything we'd found in that storage unit, all the evidence that should have cleared me, had somehow been twisted into proof of my guilt. We left the police station in a daze. Freya was shaking so hard she could barely walk. I held her up, guided her to my car, tried to think through the panic flooding my system. "This is wrong," she kept saying. "This is all wrong. He did it. Lysander Beck did it. I know he did. But he has an alibi. And he's made me look guilty. Freya, I don't know how to fight this." She stopped, turned to face me. Her eyes were wild, but there was something else there too, determination. "Then we find proof. Real proof. Something he can't twist or explain away." "How?" "I don't know yet. But Elian, I'm not letting you go to prison for something you didn't do. I'm not losing someone else. Not after I just found you." She kissed me then, hard and desperate, in the police station parking lot where anyone could see. And I kissed her back, because what did it matter now? My life was falling apart. I might as well hold on to the one thing that made me feel alive. But when we pulled apart, I saw Camden standing 20 feet away, watching us. His face was a mask of betrayal and rage. "Freya," he called. "We need to talk. Now." She squeezed my hand. "Go home," she whispered. "I'll handle this. I'm not leaving you with. He won't hurt me. He's angry, but he's not violent. Please, Elian. Trust me." I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at me to stay, to protect her, to not let her face the wreckage of her engagement alone. But she was right, my being there would only make things worse. I drove home through streets that felt alien and hostile. Every police car I passed made my heart race. Every stranger felt like a threat. I'd gone from feeling nothing to feeling everything, and it was going to destroy me. The apartment felt too empty. I tried to work, to focus on sound files and mixing boards, but I couldn't concentrate. I tried to eat, but food tasted like ash. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Freya's parents burning alive in a fire I was being accused of setting. At 3 a.m., my phone rang. Freya. I ended it, she said without preamble. With Camden. The engagement is off. Freya. His father is convinced you're guilty, Elian. He thinks we're in this together. That I've been helping you cover it up. Camden tried to defend me at first, but he believes it too. He thinks I'm so desperate to feel something that I've convinced myself you're innocent. I am innocent. I know that. I know it in my bones. But everyone else sees what they want to see. She paused. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Anything. The person in that photograph with you. The one Beck showed us. Do you remember who that was? What you talked about? I'd been trying to remember for hours. I don't. That whole period is a blur. I talked to a lot of people. Other engineers, building maintenance, random people who were working late. It could have been anyone. Could it have been Beck? The question stopped me cold. What? Think about it. What if Beck approached you back then? What if he tried to get information about the studios, about the building, about something? And you don't remember because you weren't paying attention to anything that wasn't directly related to your grief? I closed my eyes, tried to pull that night forward. October 12th. 2 days before the fire. I'd been working on a car commercial, I think. Or maybe it was an insurance spot. The sessions all bled together. And yes, I'd stepped outside for air at some point. Someone had been there. We'd talked. About the building layout, I said suddenly. Someone asked me about the building layout. What businesses were in it, what the access points were. I thought they were thinking about renting space there. I gave them a general overview. It was maybe a 5-minute conversation. Could you identify them? Was it Beck? I don't know. The photo is too blurry, and I wasn't looking at faces. I was just existing. But if it was Beck, Freya said slowly, that means he planned this from the beginning. He used you to get information about the building across from my parents' house. He took your photo to create evidence for later. He's been setting you up since before the fire even happened. But why? If he wanted to frame someone, why choose me specifically? Because you were perfect. You were barely functional, grieving, not paying attention. You had access to the equipment cleaner that was used as an accelerant. You left town right after the fire in a way that could look suspicious. You were the ideal fall guy. I felt sick. So what do? We prove it. We prove Beck was in the city that night despite his alibi. We prove he had the means and motive. We prove you're innocent by proving he's guilty. And how exactly do we do that? Her voice hardened. By finding evidence he doesn't know exists. By talking to people he doesn't know we know. by being smarter and more desperate than he is. Over the next 3 weeks, we became investigators. We tracked down every person who'd been at that photography conference where Beck claimed to have been. We found 3 people who'd sign in for him but admitted they hadn't actually seen him after the first day. We discovered he'd paid cash for a last-minute flight back to our city the day before the fire, a ticket he'd booked under a different name. We found the hardware store where he'd purchased supplies that could be used to make an incendiary device. The clerk remembered him because he'd paid cash for a large order and asked specific questions about timing mechanisms. We found a storage locker he'd rented under yet another name, filled with more notebooks detailing his obsession with Freya, his rage at her family, his detailed plans for the fire. And we found evidence that Detective Cross had known about some of this all along. That he'd been protecting Beck because Beck had information about a case Cross had mishandled years ago. That Cross had been willing to frame me to keep his own corruption hidden. We presented everything to the police, not to Cross, but to his superiors. To the DA's office. To anyone who would listen. And 3 days before Freya's wedding would have been, Lysander Beck was arrested. Not just for the murders of Freya's parents, but for stalking, for attempted murder. Freya and Rafe had been his targets too. The parents' deaths were collateral damage, for a dozen other crimes that had been hiding in plain sight. Detective Cross was suspended pending investigation. Camden disappeared from our lives entirely, unable to face his father's corruption or his own role in nearly destroying an innocent person. I was cleared. Completely, officially, publicly cleared. And Freya came to my apartment the night after Beck's arrest with tears streaming down her face and said, "It's over. It's finally over. My parents can rest. Rafe can heal. And we can." "We can what?" I asked, holding her close. "We can try," she whispered. "To be real people with a real relationship instead of 2 broken souls clinging to each other in crisis. If you want to." I kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the solid warmth of her in my arms. "I want to," I said. "God help me, I want to." It wasn't a fairy tale ending. We both had therapy to go through, trauma to process, lives to rebuild. Rafe didn't trust me for months, convinced I was just another person who would hurt his sister. My parents were confused by my sudden resurrection from the emotional dead and didn't quite know what to make of Freya. But we tried. Through panic attacks and nightmares and moments when the numbness threatened to return. Through the trial, where we had to relive everything in excruciating detail. Through the media circus that followed, the true crime podcasts that dissected our story, the strangers who thought they knew us because they'd read about us online. And somewhere in all that trying, we built something real. 6 months after Beck's arrest, Freya moved into my apartment. Not because we were ready, exactly, but because her old place, the one she'd shared with Rafe, was being fumigated, and somehow temporary became permanent without either of us really deciding. She brought her plants. Dozens of them, in various states of health, each one rescued from a clearance section or a friend who'd given up. Within weeks, my sterile apartment had transformed into something living and green, full of leaves that needed trimming and soil that needed watering and tiny ecosystems that demanded attention. "You know these are all going to die when I inevitably forget to care for them," I told her, watching as she positioned a particularly dramatic fern in the corner where Sophia's reading chair used to be. "Then I'll revive them," Freya said, not looking up. "Or they'll die, and we'll learn something about impermanence and letting go. Either way, we'll survive." It was such a casually profound statement, delivered while she was elbow-deep in potting soil, that I fell a little more in love with her right there. But living together meant confronting the ghosts we'd both been carrying. Sophia's things were still everywhere, books on the shelves, a sweater in the closet, her favorite coffee mug that I'd never been able to bring myself to use or throw away. I'd been existing around these artifacts for 3 years, neither acknowledging them nor dealing with them, just letting them occupy space like museum pieces in an exhibit about a life that no longer existed. Freya never said anything directly. But one Saturday morning, I found her standing in front of the bookshelf, her hand hovering over a framed photo of Sophia and me from our engagement party. "I can put that away," I said quickly. "I should have." "Don't." Freya turned to me, her expression complicated. She was real. She mattered. "You don't have to erase her for my sake. But it's not fair to you. Having her ghost everywhere. Life isn't fair to anyone." She picked up the photo, studied it. She was beautiful. "You both look so happy here." We were. I moved closer, looked at the image of 2 people I barely recognized. Young. Uncomplicated. Certain that their happiness was permanent. That was taken 6 months before she died. We'd just signed the lease on this place. We were arguing about whether to paint the bedroom blue or green. "What did you decide?" "We never did. She died, and I couldn't bring myself to paint anything. So it's still the landlord's beige." Freya set the photo back down, turned to face me fully. "I think we should paint it. Not blue or green. Something else. Something that's ours." And so we did. We painted the bedroom a soft gray lavender that Freya found on a paint chip labeled Twilight Fog. We sorted through Sophia's things together, keeping what felt meaningful, donating the rest. We didn't erase her, that wasn't the point. But we made space for something new to exist alongside the memory of what had been. Rafe started coming around more. He'd been distant since the trial, processing everything in his own way, but gradually he thawed. It helped that I never pushed, never demanded anything from him. I just existed in his sister's life as honestly as I could, letting him decide what role, if any, I would play in his. The breakthrough came on what would have been their mother's 60th birthday. Freya had planned to visit her parents' grave alone, but at the last minute, Rafe asked if I wanted to come. We stood at the double headstone in silence for a long time. Freya placed fresh flowers, native wildflowers she'd grown herself from seeds she'd collected in the field behind their old house. Rafe had brought a bottle of their father's favorite whiskey and poured a small amount on the ground. "Dad would have liked you," he said suddenly, not looking at me. He always said the mark of a good person was how they handled adversity. "You didn't fall apart when you were accused. You fought back, but you fought fair. That matters." "Thank you," I said quietly. "Mom would have been trickier." He almost smiled. "She was protective of Freya. Would have grilled you about your intentions, your plans, your ability to take care of her daughter." "I don't take care of Freya," I said. "We take care of each other." Rafe finally looked at me. "Good answer." After that, things got easier. Not perfect, Freya still had nightmares about the fire, and I still had moments where the guilt about Sophia would crash over me like a wave, but easier. We learned each other's rhythms, our triggers, our needs. We learned how to be gentle with each other's broken places without treating each other like fragile things that might shatter. My work started to come back into focus. For 3 years, I'd been technically competent but creatively dead, going through motions without any real passion. Now, I started hearing things again. Really hearing them. The layers of sound in the world, the way different frequencies told different stories, the emotional weight that audio could carry. Yosef, my boss at Meridian, noticed. "Whatever you're doing differently," he said one day after I'd delivered a particularly complex soundscape for a documentary about migration patterns, "keep doing it. This is the best work you've done since, well, since." He didn't say since Sophia, but we both knew. "I'm trying," I told him. "To be present. To care about things again." It shows. Freya's illustration work was taking off too. The trial had brought her unwanted publicity, but it also led to opportunities. A major publisher reached out about illustrating a field guide to urban plant life. A gallery wanted to feature her detailed botanical drawings in a solo show. Someone once told me these stories would never matter, that no one would listen. If you're here right now, help me prove them wrong. Subscribe, because stories like this deserve a voice. I heard myself echoing those words to a small podcast that wanted to interview us about our experience. Freya squeezed my hand as I said it, and I knew she understood. Our story, our pain, our survival, our strange path back to feeling, it mattered. Not just to us, but to anyone who'd ever felt lost in their own grief. Where are you watching from? I'd love to know that our story reached you. Drop a comment below with your location, and if this resonated with you, hit subscribe. Stories like this need to be told. Work was one thing. Life was another. And slowly, impossibly, we built a life. Small things, mostly. Saturday morning trips to the farmer's market where Freya would buy vegetables she'd sketch before we cooked them. Evenings spent with her drawing at one end of the couch while I mixed audio at the other, both of us working in comfortable silence. Learning to cook meals that neither of us had grown up eating, creating traditions that belonged only to us. We took a road trip upstate to visit my parents. My mother cried when she met Freya, happy tears, relief tears, tears that said I thought I'd lost you too without words. My father, more reserved, simply pulled me aside and said, "Don't let this one go." "I won't," I promised. We met Freya's extended family at a reunion organized by her aunt, the first one since her parents died. There were cousins who looked like her mother, uncles who had her father's laugh, a grandmother who held both our hands and said, "You've both suffered enough. Be happy now. You have permission." Permission. Such a strange thing to need, but we both needed it. Permission to move forward. Permission to love someone new. Permission to be happy despite the weight of our losses. 8 months in, Freya woke me up at 3 a.m., shaking and crying. I held her while she sobbed about her mother, about how she'd never get to share this with her parents, about how unfair it was that they'd been taken when they still had so much life left to live. "I know," I whispered into her hair. "I know it's not fair. Sophia should have lived to be 80. Your parents deserved to meet their grandchildren. None of this is fair. But it's what we have," she said when she'd cried herself out. "It's what we have," I agreed. Here's what I want to ask you, those of you who've made it this far in our story, when you've lost something irreplaceable, how do you give yourself permission to find joy again? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I think a lot of us are struggling with this question. 1 year after Beck's arrest, we went back to the site where Freya's family home had stood. It had been cleared and sold, turned into a small community garden that the neighborhood maintained. Freya had helped design it, insisting that native plants be included, that it serve pollinators and birds, that it give back to the ecosystem in some small way. We sat on a bench donated by her parents' friends, surrounded by flowers Freya had illustrated in her work, and watched children play in the space where she'd once lived. "Do you think they'd be proud?" she asked quietly. "Of what we made from the ashes?" "I think they'd be proud of you for surviving," I said. "The garden is just a bonus." She leaned against me, and we sat in comfortable silence. It wasn't closure. I'd learned that closure was a myth, something people who hadn't experienced real loss believed in. But it was peace. Or the beginning of peace, anyway. That night, back at the apartment, Freya pulled out a small box from her dresser. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a small stone the color of twilight fog. "Before you panic," she said quickly, "this is not a proposal. I'm not ready for that, and I don't think you are either. But I wanted you to know that I bought this 6 months ago. I saw it in a vintage shop, and I thought, someday. When we're ready. When we've healed enough to make promises about the future." I took the box, studied the ring. It was beautiful. Understated. Completely Freya. "Someday," I agreed. "When we're ready." She kissed me, soft and slow. "Thank you for being patient with me. With my nightmares and my plants and my need to turn everything into art. Thank you for being patient with my silence and my guilt and my inability to throw away Sophia's coffee mug." We laughed, because what else could we do? We were two broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something new. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy and complicated and sometimes painful. But it was real. And after 3 years of feeling nothing, real was everything. The trial had taught us that justice existed, even when it came slowly. Beck was sentenced to life without parole. Detective Cross lost his badge and faced his own charges for obstruction and corruption. Camden, we heard through mutual friends that he'd moved to another city, started over, was trying to rebuild his life away from his father's shadow. I didn't hate him. Couldn't, really. He'd been a victim too, in his way. A good person caught up in his father's corruption, making choices that seemed right at the time but led to terrible places. "Do you think about them sometimes?" Freya asked one night. We were in bed, the room painted twilight fog, her plants creating shadows on the walls. Sophia and Camden. The lives we almost had. Sometimes, I admitted. Not as much as I used to. Not in the way I used to. How did you used to think about it? With guilt. Like I'd betrayed her by surviving. By eventually feeling things again. By falling in love with you. And now? Now I think she would want me to be happy. She wasn't cruel or possessive. She loved me, and people who love you want you to live even after they're gone. Freya was quiet for a moment. I think my parents would like you. I think they'd be glad I found someone who understands grief without being consumed by it. I'm still a little consumed by it. We both are. But we're swimming now instead of drowning. That's something. It was something. It was everything. 18 months after I stopped feeling anything, and 18 months after Freya brought me back to life, we faced the question that had been hovering at the edges of our relationship since the beginning: what came next? We'd survived crisis together. We'd solved a murder, cleared my name, brought a killer to justice. We'd learned to live with our grief, to honor our dead without being buried by them. We'd built something real and lasting in the ruins of our old lives. But could we thrive? Could we do more than just survive? The question came into sharp focus when Freya received an offer she couldn't refuse: a year-long artist residency in Scotland, documenting the botanical diversity of the Highlands. It was prestigious, well-paid, and exactly the kind of opportunity that could define her career. It was also 7,000 miles away. She told me about it on a Tuesday evening, her voice careful, her eyes searching my face for a reaction I wasn't ready to give. "It's incredible," I said, because it was. "You should absolutely do it." "It's a year, Elian." "A full year. I'd have to leave in 3 months." "I know. And I'm asking you to come with me." The words hung between us, enormous and terrifying. "You want me to leave my job, my life here, everything I've rebuilt, to follow you to Scotland for a year?" I wasn't angry. Just processing. "I want us to have an adventure that isn't about trauma or survival or piecing ourselves back together. I want us to choose something joyful and scary for good reasons instead of desperate ones." She took my hands. "But only if you want to. I won't resent you if you say no. I won't leave you if you can't come. We'll figure something out." I thought about it for 3 days. Talked to Yosef, who said sound engineering was portable and I could freelance from anywhere. Talked to my parents, who said adventure was good for the soul. Talked to Dr. Reeves, my therapist, who pointed out that I'd been stuck in the same apartment, the same routines, the same carefully controlled environment for years. "Growth sometimes requires change," she said. "Are you holding on to this place because it brings you comfort, or because you're afraid of what letting go might mean?" "Both, probably." But fear wasn't a good enough reason to stay. On the 4th day, I told Freya yes. Her face lit up in a way that made my chest ache with happiness. "Really? You're sure?" "I'm terrified," I admitted. "But I'm also excited." "Is that allowed? To be excited about something that isn't related to fixing what's broken?" "I think it's mandatory," she said, kissing me hard. "I think we've earned the right to be excited about our future instead of haunted by our past." The next 3 months were chaos. Subletting the apartment, packing what we'd need, arranging work visas, saying goodbye to everyone who'd been part of our healing. Rafe was supportive but sad. He and Freya had gotten close again, and the idea of her being so far away clearly hurt. "Take care of her," he told me the night before we left. "Not because she needs taking care of, she's the strongest person I know. But because someone should. Someone who understands what she's been through." "I will," I promised. "And you take care of yourself. Call us. Visit us. Don't disappear into your work the way you did after the fire." He hugged me then, brief and awkward but genuine. "Thank you. For bringing my sister back to life. For giving her a reason to be excited about the future." The flight to Edinburgh was long and turbulent. Freya slept most of the way, her head on my shoulder, while I stared out the window at clouds and ocean and tried to believe this was really happening. That I was really leaving behind everything familiar to start fresh in a country I'd never visited, with a woman I'd known for less than 2 years. Madness. Beautiful, terrifying madness. Scotland was not what I expected. Somehow colder and more beautiful than I'd imagined. The residency provided us with a small cottage in the Highlands, surrounded by hills that turned purple with heather in the summer and white with snow in the winter. The nearest town was a 30-minute drive. The nearest city was hours away. We were alone. Really alone. For the first time since we'd met, there were no therapists or family members or friends dropping by. No familiar places to hide in when things got hard. Just us, the landscape, and whatever we could build together. The first month was an adjustment. Freya threw herself into her work, hiking for hours to document rare plants, spending evenings sketching by lamplight. I set up a small recording studio in the cottage's second bedroom and took on freelance projects that let me work remotely. We learned to cook on a temperamental stove that required coaxing. We learned to navigate narrow roads where sheep had right of way. We learned to appreciate silence, not the empty silence of grief, but the full silence of a place where human noise was minimal and the world spoke in wind and rain and birdsong. And we learned each other in ways we hadn't had time for before. Without crisis to bond us, we had to figure out who we were as just people. People who loved each other, yes, but also people with different rhythms and needs and ways of being in the world. Freya was an early riser who needed movement and nature. I was a night owl who needed solitude and creative flow. She needed to talk through her emotions. I needed to sit with them silently before I could articulate them. She was spontaneous, I was a planner. She thrived on chaos, I needed structure. None of this had mattered when we were just surviving. But now that we were actually living, it all mattered enormously. We fought. Not big dramatic fights, we were both too aware of how fragile life could be to waste it on pointless conflict. But small, important fights about how to share space, how to balance work and relationship, how to be individuals while also being a unit. I feel like I'm losing myself in us, Freya said one night, 6 months into our Scottish adventure. We'd been arguing about something trivial, I can't even remember what, and suddenly we were talking about bigger things. What do you mean? I mean, I spent 2 years being numb. Then I spent 1.5 years with you, and you brought me back to life. But I don't know who I am outside of grief and outside of us. I need to figure that out. It hurt. But I understood. What do you need? Space. Not space from you, exactly. Just room to be myself. To make choices that are mine alone. To fail at things without it affecting you. To succeed at things that are just for me. So we created boundaries. Freya started taking solo hiking trips, sometimes gone for days, camping in the hills while she documented remote plant populations. I started taking on bigger projects that required intense focus, losing myself in sound design in ways I hadn't allowed myself to in years. And slowly, impossibly, we became both separate and together. 2 whole people choosing each other instead of 2 broken halves desperately clinging for survival. The cottage became a sanctuary. Freya's illustrations covered the walls, detailed drawings of highland flora that were simultaneously scientifically accurate and achingly beautiful. My sound recordings played through speakers she'd hidden throughout the house, ambient captures of rain on stone, wind through grass, rivers over rocks. We created something that was ours. Not a replacement for what we'd lost, but something new. Something that acknowledged our past without being defined by it. 7 months into the residency, on a night when the northern lights were visible from our cottage, Freya and I lay on blankets in the garden, watching green and purple dance across the sky. I've been thinking, she said quietly, about that ring I showed you. The one I bought for someday. My heart jumped. Yeah? I don't think I'm ready yet. But I'm getting closer. And I wanted you to know that. That someday feels more like a real possibility now instead of just a hopeful idea. I'm getting closer too, I admitted. To being someone who can make promises about the future without drowning in guilt about the past. She rolled onto her side, propped herself up on one elbow. I love you, Elian Thorne. Not because you saved me or because we survived trauma together. But because of who you are when you're mixing sound at 3 in the morning. Because you remember to water my plants even though you pretend you don't care about them. Because you let me be sad without trying to fix it. Because you're brave enough to be broken and still keep trying. I pulled her close, kissed her under the alien sky. I love you too. Because you're stubborn enough to grow wildflowers in the Scottish Highlands. Because you never gave up on finding the truth about your parents. Because you're teaching me that joy doesn't dishonor grief, it's what we owe to the people we've lost. We made love in the garden that night, wrapped in blankets, the northern lights painting everything in shades of impossible green. It was slow and sweet and achingly present, not two people drowning in each other, but two people celebrating being alive. The residency ended too soon and not soon enough. We'd grown there, separately and together, in ways we'd needed. But we missed home. Missed Rafe and my parents and the lives we'd built. On the flight back, Freya held my hand and said, "Whatever comes next, we build it together. Deal?" Deal. Coming home was strange. The apartment looked the same, the tenant had taken good care of it, but we were different. We moved through familiar spaces like new people, seeing everything with fresh eyes. Rafe had gotten engaged while we were gone, to a woman named Nadia who worked in disaster relief. They'd met at a support group for people who'd lost family to violence, bonded over shared trauma, and somehow built something healthy from it. "She reminds me of you," Freya told me after we'd had dinner with them. Not physically. But in the way she understands that carrying grief doesn't mean being defined by it. My parents had aged visibly in our absence, but they seemed lighter somehow. Happier. My mother pulled me aside during our welcome home dinner and said, "You look alive again. Really alive. Whatever you and Freya did in Scotland, it was the right thing." Work came back easily. Yosef had kept my position open, and the projects I'd done remotely had built my reputation. I had more work than I could handle, doing sound design for documentaries and independent films and art installations. Creative work that mattered, that let me tell stories through audio in ways that moved people. Freya's career exploded. The botanical illustrations from Scotland became a book, a beautiful hardcover field guide that won awards and sold out its first printing. Galleries fought to represent her. Universities invited her to speak. She was offered teaching positions, residencies, collaborations with scientists studying climate change's impact on plant life. We were thriving. Individually and together. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. 2 years after we met in that hospital waiting room, Freya suggested we visit Sophia's grave together. "Are you sure?" I asked. We'd never gone together before. That had always been something I did alone. "I think it's time," she said. "I think we need to acknowledge all the people who brought us here. The ones who lived and the ones who didn't." So we went. It was a clear autumn day, leaves turning gold and red, the air crisp and perfect. We brought flowers, native wildflowers Freya had grown from seeds she'd collected in Scotland. I introduced them, formally and awkwardly. "Sophia, this is Freya. Freya, this is Sophia." "I wish I'd known you," Freya said to the headstone. "Elian talks about you sometimes. About your laugh and your determination and how you never let him get away with being less than he could be. I think you'd probably have opinions about me. About whether I'm good enough for him. I hope you'd approve. I hope you'd be glad he found someone. That he didn't stay frozen forever." I couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. 3 years of grief that I thought I'd processed came rushing back, but different now. Not the crushing, numbing grief that had destroyed me. Something gentler. Sadder but cleaner. "I'm sorry," I finally managed to say. For letting you drive that night. For not calling you back. For not being able to save you. I'll carry that forever. But I'm also grateful. For the time we had. For what you taught me about love. For the foundation you gave me that let me eventually love someone else. We stood there for a long time, the three of us, two living, one dead, all connected by the strange paths grief and healing had taken us. On the drive home, Freya said, "Thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you for asking to come." Do you think she'd really approve of us? I thought about it honestly. I think she'd be suspicious at first. Ask hard questions. Make you prove you were serious. But once she was convinced, yes. I think she'd be glad I found you. She wasn't the kind of person who'd want me to suffer forever. My parents would have loved you, Freya said. Mom would have immediately started planning our wedding. Dad would have interrogated you about your intentions and then told terrible jokes to break the tension. I wish I could have met them. Me too. We drove in comfortable silence for a while. Then Freya said, "Elian? I'm ready." For what? For someday. For that ring I bought. For making promises about the future. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Are you proposing to me right now? In my car? On the way home from visiting my dead fiancé's grave? She laughed, surprised and genuine. When you put it that way, it sounds kind of awful. Kind of, I agreed. But I was smiling. Although honestly, it's very us. Nothing about our relationship has been conventional. So is that a yes? I pulled the car over, turned to face her. Freya Valdis, I have felt more in the 2 years I've known you than I felt in the 3 years before we met. You brought me back to life. You taught me that healing isn't linear and love isn't simple, and sometimes the best things come from the worst moments. You're brilliant and stubborn, and you grow plants in places they shouldn't survive, which feels like a metaphor for everything about us. So yes. Yes, I'll marry you. On one condition. What condition? I pulled out my phone, found the contact for a jeweler I'd been quietly working with for the past 3 months. Showed her the design I'd commissioned, a ring that matched hers, simple and elegant, with stones the color of twilight fog. I get to propose to you too, I said. Properly. At a time and place that isn't in my car after visiting graves. Deal? Deal, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. I proposed 3 weeks later, at the community garden built where her parents' house had stood. It was sunset, the light turning everything golden, the plants Freya had helped design swaying in the autumn breeze. Rafe was there, and Nadia, and my parents, and a few close friends who'd been part of our healing. Freya, I said, holding her hands, 2.5 years ago, you walked into an emergency room in a state of panic, and somehow, in 47 seconds, you brought a dead man back to life. You didn't know it. I didn't know it. But something happened in that moment that changed everything. You taught me that feeling again, really feeling, was worth the risk of being hurt. That loving someone new didn't erase the people we'd lost. That we could honor our grief while also choosing joy. I don't know what the future holds. But I know I want to face it with you. Will you marry me? She said yes. Obviously she said yes. We've already decided. But doing it this way, publicly, intentionally, surrounded by people who loved us and in a place that symbolized growth from ashes, made it real in ways our car conversation couldn't. The wedding was small. Just family and close friends at a venue overlooking the ocean. Freya wore a dress the color of cream with wildflowers in her hair. I wore a suit Sophia would have hated and Freya loved, which felt right somehow. Rafe walked her down the aisle since her father couldn't. My father stood as my best man since I couldn't ask the friends I'd lost touch with during my years of grief. We wrote our own vows, promises about honesty and patience and making room for each other's sadness while also celebrating each other's joy. We didn't pretend it would be easy. We'd learned too much about life's unpredictability to make naive promises. But we promised to try. To show up. To be honest. To hold each other through the hard parts and celebrate the good parts and build something lasting from the foundation of our shared brokenness. At the reception, I gave a toast. I want to tell you all something. 3 years ago, I stopped feeling anything at all. Life became cardboard. Tasteless. Gray. I existed but I wasn't alive. And then I met Freya, and in one impossible moment, everything changed. She'll tell you I saved her, but the truth is we saved each other. We gave each other permission to feel again. To love again. To believe that joy and grief could coexist without one diminishing the other. I looked at Freya, radiant in the candlelight. I haven't felt anything in 3 years, until you. And now I feel everything. Terror and hope. Gratitude and grief. Love so fierce it terrifies me. You brought me back to life, Freya. And I plan to spend the rest of that life making sure you never regret it. She was crying. Half the room was crying. But they were good tears. Healing tears. Tears that said yes, this is hard, but it's also beautiful, and we're all here together, witnessing these two broken people choose to be whole. The reception lasted late into the night. We danced badly, because neither of us had rhythm, and laughed and accepted congratulations from people who'd watched us climb out of our respective hells. Rafe gave a speech about Freya's stubbornness and how glad he was that she'd found someone equally stubborn to match her. My mother told embarrassing stories about my childhood. Nadia talked about the courage it takes to love someone when you've learned how easily love can be taken away. And through it all, I kept looking at my wife, still such a strange and wonderful word, and thinking about the impossible path that had brought us here. A car accident. A fire. A murder. A false accusation. A year in Scotland. Countless hours of therapy and tears and slowly learning to be human again. And somehow, impossibly, it had led to this, two people standing together, choosing each other, building a future from the ruins of their pasts. We didn't get a fairy tale ending because life doesn't work that way. We got a real ending, which is better. Messier. More complicated. But more honest too. In the years that followed, we built a life. Freya published more books and taught workshops on botanical illustration. I scored documentaries and sound-designed installations that made people cry. We bought a house with a big yard that Freya immediately turned into a native plant garden. We fostered rescue dogs who were as broken as we'd been, giving them time and space to heal. We had fights and makeups. Days when the grief came back hard and unexpected. Anniversaries of losses that would always hurt. But we also had adventures and joy and quiet mornings drinking coffee in a garden full of life we'd created. Rafe and Nadia got married and eventually had a daughter they named after Freya's mother. My parents aged gracefully, eventually moving closer to us so we could help them as they'd helped me. We visited Scotland every few years, returning to the cottage where we'd learned to be separate and together. And sometimes, late at night, when Freya was asleep beside me and the house was quiet, I would think about that moment in the hospital. 47 seconds that changed everything. A stranger's desperate voice cracking with grief. The impossible shock of feeling something after years of nothing. I never understood exactly why it happened. Maybe it was just random neurology, my broken brain finding a trigger to heal in the randomness of Freya's presence. Maybe it was something deeper, some connection we'd needed without knowing it. Maybe it didn't matter why. What mattered was what we'd done with it. Two broken people finding each other. Healing together. Learning that loss doesn't have to be the end of the story. That sometimes, from the ashes of everything you've lost, you can build something new and beautiful and worth the pain it took to get there. This story, our story, it's for anyone who's ever felt too broken to fix. For anyone who's lost someone and thought they'd never feel whole again. For anyone who's found love in unexpected places, with unexpected people, at unexpected times. We made it. Against odds that should have destroyed us. Through grief that could have consumed us. We made it. And if we can, maybe you can too. Before you go, I need to ask you something. This story, our story, it matters to me because it's real. Because Freya and I lived through every moment of it, and we came out the other side. But it only matters if people hear it. If it reaches someone who needs to know that feeling nothing doesn't have to be permanent. That love can find you even in your darkest moments. That healing is possible even when it seems impossible. So if this story meant something to you, if any part of it resonated, if it gave you hope, if it reminded you that you're not alone in your grief or your healing, I'm asking you to do two things. First, subscribe. Click that button and make sure you don't miss the stories that come next. Because everyone has a story. Everyone has survived something. And those stories deserve to be told, to be heard, to matter. Second, share this. Share it with someone who's grieving. Someone who feels numb. Someone who needs permission to love again after loss. Someone who needs to know that broken doesn't mean beyond repair. These stories only have power if they're told. And they're only told if people like you choose to listen and pass them on. Thank you for being here. For listening. For caring about two strangers who found each other in a hospital hallway and built a life from wreckage. We made it. And wherever you are in your own journey, whatever you've lost, whatever you're healing from, whatever impossible thing you're facing, I believe you can make it too. The end isn't the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning in disguise. Keep going. Feel everything. Love fiercely. Build something beautiful from your ashes. And if you can, tell someone else your story too. Because that's how we survive, together, through the sharing of our broken, beautiful truths.